A strange thing happened in 2019. A 5-part paranormal documentary series named after a small town in Kentucky was released for free on the internet. The promo art for the series featured a bizarre humanoid figure with a conical head and amphibious features and felt like clear counter-programming to the run-of-the-mill ghost-harassing fodder dominating mainstream TV at the time. The project was helmed by first-time director Carl Pfeiffer, and the documentary focused on the chummy husband and wife paranormal investigation duo Greg and Dana Newkirk. Up until this point, Greg and Dana were known primarily as ghost hunters, and their approach to branding could best be described as the intersection of the anomalous and fart jokes. This new documentary, Hellier, felt very different. As a pretentious snob at the time, I would have called myself a Fordian. I was less interested in ghost hunting shows and ancient aliens than I was in pondering the novel theories of Jacques Vallée and Terence McKenna and their implications for what we might call the paranormal. Even though I was skeptical of Hellier initially, it was free after all, and I dove right in. Much like the Newkirks themselves, I was shocked to discover that what was ostensibly going to be a quirky investigation of a purported goblin sighting soon became a deeply engrossing meditation on the amorphous nature of paranormal activity and the implications of the phenomena, once glimpsed, staring back wryly. Credit to the team behind Hellier, as the narrative they encountered became weirder, so did their approach to the investigation. It's clear that John Keel and his heterodoxical embrace of so-called high strangeness in considering the realm of the paranormal became an intentional roadmap for the Newkirks to follow. But maybe less obvious to them was the way in which their goblin hunting movie was also becoming infected by a mysterious, co-creative trickster energy, more akin to Robert Anton Wilson's 1977 narrative nonfiction ordeal, Cosmic Trigger. Playboy writer turned ironic cult leader Robert Anton Wilson, through documenting his own psychedelic and synchromystical experiences with skillful levity and wit, fomented an occult revolution. Although Wilson was clearly a product of the late 60s hippie generation, his novel approach to the subject of the anomalous and esoteric planted a seed in the budding young weirdos of the next generation, becoming something of a patron saint for the chaos magicians and psychonauts that would carry the occult revival torch for the cyberpunks and archaic revivalists of Generation X. By the time Hellier was released in 2019, Cosmic Trigger's influence had waned, and a new generation, unaware that all the structures holding together a consensus reality were about to crumble around them, were ripe for an initiatory artifact of their own. To my estimation, Hellier became a new participant in the initiatory current that propelled Cosmic Trigger to infamy, but updated for the internet generation and made bingeable. There's a cathartic moment early in Hellier's second season where the floor drops out from under the premise of the series, and the creators sit down to recount the flurry of messages, warnings, and clues they received after the show first premiered. These messages weren't from their target ghost hunting demographic, but a swarm of online occultists who in an uncoordinated effort had reached out in droves to explain the hidden premise of their own show to them. Hellier, the series, the project, it was suggested, is a ritual, and an initiation is being unknowingly undertaken, not only by the show's creators, but by its audience as well. Season 2 of Hellier premiered a few months before a worldwide lockdown, spurred on by the COVID-19 pandemic, would cause a large swath of the world who would normally be distracted by the mundane toils of daily life to be sucked deep down internet rabbit holes. For people like me, this was Hellier. Viewers across the globe reported synchronicities they began to experience in their own lives, seemingly a reflection of the bizarre occurrences that pursue the Newkirks in both seasons of the show. In Reddit forums and Discord servers, people were describing odd sightings of conspicuous blue star balloons similar to the investigators on the show, as well as eerily consistent audio phenomenon, frequent and uncanny occurrences of relevant names and symbols, and more widely, a feeling that the rising number of synchronicities in the lives of the show's audience were evidence that something was intentionally leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for them to follow. The bizarre effect of the phenomena, once glimpsed staring back, isn't merely an example of the hunter becoming the hunted, but rather a mystical form of call and response. The breadcrumbs people have been led to follow from this sort of engagement don't often lead in a straight line, but weave like a maze. What can seem like hoaxes and fictions, bizarrely, lead to true insights into these experiences for the participants. In many ways, these experiences are like being sucked into an alternate reality game with a loose and hidden set of rules. In this game, the initiatory phenomena seems to operate outside of the assumption that X marks the spot, instead rewarding the active participant choosing their own adventure. Was the inciting incident of the Hellier series essentially an anomalous tip about a goblin sighting in a Kentucky cave, just a ruse all along? A story that, when given the attention of Pfeiffer and the Newkirks, could be taken up and used by something else? What are we to make of the strange relationship between fiction, the phenomenon, and its ability to insert itself into our lives? My takeaway from watching Hellier and the subsequent synchronicities that entered my own life was that it wasn't the ghost hunters or speculative philosophers who seemed to have a real grasp on what I was experiencing. It was the occultists. Before long, what was once an armchair fascination with the Fortean for me became an active one. Magic has been a core part of my life ever since. I soon learned that the anomalous initiation that can follow a dead-end email tip about a goblin may be no different than the effects instigated by putting the statue of a deity on an altar and starting to talk to it like it can hear you. Today's guest also felt Hellier's initiatory effects, but in the opposite way. Celeste Mott was already a self-proclaimed witch and professional tarot reader in New Orleans' French Quarter when lockdown drove her into the show's orbit. For Celeste, Hillier didn't introduce her to magic, but showed her new ways to think about some of the stranger examples of how it manifested in her life. It turns out this wasn't Celeste's first foray into initiation via cultural artifact. Celeste has recently had more than one viral moment while recounting how she was ensnared in an online Anne Rice vampire cult in the early days of the internet. Her story is fascinating, at times hilarious, at times disturbing, and ultimately a story about how narrative has the power to initiate, manipulate, and take on a life of its own. As someone who got chewed out by a deacon for reading Interview with a Vampire during a church service when I was 9, I am so here for this story. Today, Celeste is exploring how the same narrative magic she may have once fallen prey to through a conscientious engagement with this byproduct of high strangeness can instead be harnessed for personal empowerment. Oh yeah, we talk about Mall World too. If you enjoy the show, we would love your support. I am not often one to show, but I do really love putting my time and energy into this project. If you would consider buying me a happy hour beer at the Goth Bar once a month for the effort, we have an online equivalent. Radical Elf Fam is on Patreon, where we offer early releases and extended episodes. There are also exclusive essays, deep dives into magical techniques, and a Discord server. If money is tight, a rating and review on your podcatcher of choice would be hugely appreciated. I'm also currently putting out an essay series to the public, inspired by the conversations I've had over the past few years on the show. This series is on Substack, where we go by the Foliate Head, so check that out. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Celeste Mott. Celeste Mott, welcome to Radical Elf Fam. It's awesome to have you here.
It's awesome to be here. I'm glad we made it work. I know we've been kind of chasing each other around the internet for a while at this point, so I'm glad it all worked out.
Yeah, you've been busy, so totally understand. But yeah, you honestly are one of the people I would say were on my initial list. Like, oh, I want to talk to
Oh,
Celeste at some point. There's a couple key
I love
people,
that.
like Dara was one of them, and you were
Yeah,
another one.
I love that. Yeah, and I love everyone who's been on your show is so great. I've been listening for a while. I'm a big fan,
Cool.
so I'm super
Thank you.
excited to be here.
Hell yeah, I love it. Well, I'm really excited because I'm looking at the notes I wrote down for our conversation, and I see Mall World and I see Internet and Rise Vampire Cult, which
Oh, yeah.
I just, that brings me joy to look down and see that and go like, oh yeah, what am I doing right now? Okay. So
So
yeah,
much weird shit to dig into today. Oh my God. Yeah.
I love it though. It's great. So yes, to kick things off, a recent Substack you put out was based around this idea that I had never heard of called Mall World.
Mhm.
I'm so glad you brought that to my life. So my first question, Celeste, is what is Mall World and what elevates it from a level of cultural memetics to a Jungian third space?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to be really disappointing and begin the discourse by saying could be both. I think I'm big into sort of magical concepts living in the interstitial spaces between sort of one extreme and the other, which I think, most people who practice magic are probably on that page. But I find I get a lot of comments from people saying, oh, well, someone in my mall world group the other day said, well, how do we know that we're not all just dreaming of this same location? Because everybody's been to a mall and we see them, very frequently in media. And statistically, it's very likely that many of us are going to have similar dreams because that's just how brains work. And I completely agree. I think there is like a cultural memetics component to that, especially because once something enters the cultural consciousness, as Mall World has, and we'll get into what it actually is in a second, people are seeing it, people are absorbing it, people are watching videos about it. It's in the brain, it's in the mind. Of course, you're going to start incorporating that into your unconscious and your subconscious. But my opinion is that something strange is going on there. I don't pretend to know exactly what that strange thing is, but I like the idea of it being a Jungian third space, like an oniric third space that exists on the level of the collective unconscious, on some kind of archetypal level. And I think it's fascinating that it's a mall because I guess we kind of don't think of archetypes as being in this sort of modern post 80s, post 90s era. We think of it being a lot more sort of um, I guess, ancestral and connected to these sort of deeper and more formative, platonic kind of archetypal things. But there is something kind of archetypal about a mall for people, anyone born post 1960, 1970. And I think it has entered the cultural consciousness through, direct mundane experience. But I also think there might be something strange going on there magically. So, mall world as I understand it, is a concept that seems to have gained some popularity largely initially on TikTok. And every time I bring up TikTok, the serious the serious occultists are like, this bitch is talking about TikTok again. Shut up. And I understand why, because, it's very easy to eye roll at newer social media apps, especially if the audience or the culture on that app skews younger. I think we tend to be a little uncharitable toward younger people and younger practitioners, particularly. And there's a lot of new age stuff that flies around TikTok, and there is a lot of misinformation. And of course, there is the governmental takeover of the app, which is concerning. So there's things to be, it's worth eye rolling over. But it's also such an interesting proving ground for how an idea can become, viral or mimetic. So sometime last year, I want to say sort of early fall, I started seeing these videos talking about Mall World. And I sort of said, what's Mall World? What are we talking about? And it was all these, largely younger content creators talking about these shared experiences of dreaming about a mall. And the mall was usually a kind of 80s neon pink and blue, very sort of Starlight Mall from Stranger Things vibe. Or it was this backrooms, liminal, Silent Hill esque, spooky kind of abandoned mall. And I started thinking to myself, like, damn, I feel like I've had some mall dreams also. What's that about? And I kind of fell down the rabbit hole deeper. And I can't remember the username of this person, sadly, but someone on TikTok has actually drawn up an entire map of the mall world writ large, which is not just a mall, because it turns out that many of us dream about the mall being attached to an airport. And there's sort of internally consistent geography to this shared dream space where this attaches to this and this attaches to the other thing. There's a thrift store by the side of the highway, which feels very Lynchian to me. There's, you know,
Hmm.
this sort of liminal hotel area. There's a beach resort. And the more I started absorbing content about this, the more I started thinking, damn, this is so strange because I've been a vivid and a lucid dreamer my whole life. But because it's not culturally normalized really to talk about our dreams. Most people are like, shut up. Stop. Don't tell me about your dreams. I don't care. Um, it seemed like for the first time, hundreds of thousands of people were recognizing commonality in the dream space. And so my occultist witch ass was like, hmm, what's going on here? And also, what can we do with it? How can we explore this through a mystical or an esoteric lens? Because I'm deep into many weird things. I absolutely believe that we can mutual dream. I believe we do have a shared unconscious space. You see it in folkloric witchcraft, the idea of, hag riding people, hedge riding, crossing into dream space, sending people dreams. And so I thought, this is a fertile field. Let's see what we can do.
That's fascinating. Oh my God. There's so many threads to pull on there, but just a couple of the initial thoughts I had about that. One was the fact that you talked about how there's airports attached to the mall in many people's experiences. Then you bring in the beach resort, which is so interesting because not only are they all liminal spaces in this weird way, like to me, an airport feels like a mall because it has a
Yeah,
mall element. You know what I mean? There's literally
absolutely.
individual shops like a mall. And it's also a place that I feel like is designed to kind of try to keep you calm in certain ways. Like most airports only use blue. They do these things to try to keep us calm. So there's this like weird manipulative liminal aspect to both of these things that feel kind of built into like the capitalist structure, which is like the pinnacle of the 80s and early 90s. So it's
Mhm.
strange that maybe for modern day occultists, like the mall is the new Crossroads or something like that.
That's a fascinating lens to put on it, but I think you're right. I mean, they are all liminal spaces, the hotel even, the beach
Yeah.
resort. It's not that people don't also dream of their, personal spaces, but one thing I did notice in all of these reports where people were saying, "Oh, I have this dream location," comes up over and over again. Grandparents' house comes up a lot. Actual house you're living in, way less frequently. Which I
Yeah.
think is curious because I mean, not that the grandparents' house is not, strictly speaking, a liminal space, but in a way it
Mm-hmm.
is because it's familiar, you kind of belong
Mm-hmm.
there, but you're probably not living there permanently, it's transitory. You're gonna go, you're gonna hang out
Mm-hmm.
with your grandparents, you're gonna go home. And you're right, the mall is the same, the airport
Hmm.
is the same. There's this sense of in between places. And yeah, it kinda is a modern crossroads dominated by the horrors of capitalism, so yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yay.
interesting that you mentioned the grandma's house too, because now that makes me think of like, and you kind of touch on this in the piece, but the role potentially of nostalgia in this project. That reminds me, because you bring up memetics, the Mark Fisher slow cancellation of the future
Mm.
concept. You know that one?
I don't know if I'm familiar. Fill me in.
Okay. You probably have heard it in passing.
Uh-huh.
But essentially, Mark Fisher posits this idea that has been picked up in places kind of like Chuck Klosterman ran with it a lot when he wrote about the 90s and these types of things. That if you just look at cultural artifacts and how they evolve over time, so music, for example, if you look at Nirvana and then go back 10 years and go back 20 years, music just continually seems to be advancing at like an unrecognizable pace to where if you played Nirvana to somebody 20 years before, it would be very jarring and feel
Mm.
like something radical.
Mhm.
Um, and that his, well, people around him have posited that post 9/11, that stops, basically.
Hmm.
The future is canceled on a cultural level. And one of the kind of thoughts of it, because Mark Fisher has like a very socialist bent, is that it has to do with capitalism. And in a sense,
now we're stuck in this like nostalgic loop that we can't really get out of. We're just trapped in it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, you
That's
should read
fascinating.
actually what he says. It'll be more eloquent and deep and beautiful. But it's just interesting to consider how the mall, for people like you and me, we grew up going to the mall, so it makes more
Mhm,
sense that we'd be nostalgic
mhm.
for it. It's interesting though now that there's kids watching Stranger Things who maybe will never go to a mall and they still are going to it.
That's what I thought was interesting too, because I got
Yeah.
some comments sort of again on the videos that I made about this and the stuff that I've written about it. And people were saying, well, everyone's been to a mall. And I thought to
Hmm.
myself, well, most of the people reporting mall world stuff are Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And I'm not sure if that
Hmm.
many of them will have been to a mall, certainly not in the way that malls existed when we were younger. It
Yeah.
really is a kind of quintessential 80s, 90s experience of going
Hmm.
that's where you went, with your friends. You went to the mall. Um, and so that fascinates me that it's in there in the subconscious or maybe in the collective unconscious as this kind of cultural touchstone, even if you haven't maybe directly experienced it or you haven't directly experienced it as much as someone growing up in the 90s.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And then, so you discover this meme, you get kind of curious about how it can play into your astral travel, lucid dreaming techniques. I love this. And you put together a mall world travel guide that folks can purchase online. And
Yeah.
then you also organize an experiment to encourage people to access it astrally. So I'm curious how that experiment
Yeah.
went. The first experiment, what kind of came out of that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. The first thing is if you're thinking about running a large scale psychic experiment, don't do what I did, which is just dive into doing it without without considering how might this come across because instantaneously I had a bunch of people saying she works for the CIA, um, which was crazy. I don't work for the CIA. I don't I was gonna say I wish I did. I don't wish I did. I probably would have better health insurance if I worked for the CIA, so there is that.
Yeah, there's perks. There's
Um,
perks.
maybe there yeah, I'm not a government shill, sadly.
You would learn
But,
some cool shit about UFOs probably.
I probably would, I will say, my lifelong goal when I was a very, very tiny child was to be a spy. So, hit me
Yeah,
up,
never
CIA.
talking.
I'm kidding. They don't want me. Um,
Fans of the show, fans of the show.
right, right. I'm sure they're listening all the time. They got your apartment bugged. But yeah, so that was the first thing. And then I got a lot of people because there's a sigil involved in doing the Mall World experiment. And that's just a
Oh,
sigil that I designed. I didn't do it in like the alphabet phrase method. It was just a channeled sigil. But
okay.
I remember finishing the sigil to put in the PDF for the travel guide and thinking and looking at it and thinking, hmm, this does look like some sigils look sort of flourishy and gentle, and this it's
Mhm.
got like a big eye in the middle. I was like, people are
Huh,
not going to like this,
really?
but let's just do it anyway. and so, and so the next thing was that people were like, understandably, can you explain what the sigil is? How did you
Yeah,
make it? And I said that's fair enough. It's important to be have questions when you're undertaking something that's going to impact your subconscious. You should be asking questions. But then I had one lady in my DMs. I didn't see it for days because it was hidden in the hidden folder. But this one lady lost her mind and she was like, I know you've been creeping into my sister and my boyfriend's dreams. And I know you're trying to vampirize our dream space and you are an evil person and you need to stop. And I was like,
my god.
this is like a nice lady who runs a hat shop in Wisconsin. I was like, I promise you, I have so many other things I'm doing. I'm not in your boyfriend's dreams, girl. Promise you. So that's my caveat for anyone who ever wants to do something like this. Just maybe, don't dive in. Have some checks and balances in place.
No
But
Illuminati symbolism in your sigils
don't
for
do
group work.
that.
Yeah.
Don't make jokes on podcasts about being in the CIA. People are not going to take that well either. But,
Dog whistle, dog whistle.
right, right. But I just thought it was such a rich opportunity to see what would happen with a collective dream space. I've been a firm believer that it's possible to access collective dream space for many, many years. There aren't that many scientific studies outside of CIA and government studies, on this kind of thing. Science, mainstream science that's publicly available has kind of avoided dream space generally. They're not that interested. And so I thought, well, let's just do a little citizen science project. It'll be fun. It's just like tagging monarch butterflies in the spring, only oh God, now I've said monarch. They're all
You
going to
said
think I'm in the
monarch.
CIA. Shit. God damn. Um, the comments are going to go crazy. So I put it together, this little guide, and it just included, there was a sigil and very, very basic ritual work that people could undertake if they wanted to. And then there was like a little guided meditation to do. And put it all together in like a cute little like travel guide. I thought it was cute and fun. And I thought maybe like 20 people would be like, oh yeah, cool, sounds good. There's like 700 people in the group chat on Instagram.
Holy
The travel
shit.
guide was downloaded 500 times. So
Oh my God.
yeah, it went nuclear. It went really big, which is cool. So
Whoa.
we haven't gotten to the point of the experiment yet where we're sort of fully collating and releasing the data. What I had people do is, before we started sort of phase 1 and had our collective dreaming time, I had them fill out a Google form. And the Google form was basically, write in what you are going to appear like in the dream. Part of the meditation involves looking into a mirror in a meditative state and kind of constructing for yourself a sort of dream avatar. And I said, write down in this Google form what you want to look like. And then once we're finished all of these phases of the experiment, we'll publish those results anonymously. And then people can go back and go, oh shit, did I see this person in the dream? And that way you're not, biasing
Yeah.
yourself ahead of time. So that we haven't gotten to that point yet. But what I will say is, since starting the experiment, I think about 70% of people that I polled said that they have had increased lucidity and increased dream recall and increased vividness in the dream space, which is a pretty cool finding. And then
Yeah.
the second finding was a roughly, 30 to 40% of people had managed to go to Mall World on the nights that we were doing the experiment. So not the majority, but a chunk. And
Yeah.
then of the people who didn't firmly, they weren't sure if they did or not, a lot of
Hmm.
the remaining respondents said, okay, I didn't quite get to Mall World, but I did have some sort of strange experience. A good example is, we had phase 2 of the experiment. We decided we wanted to have a tell of, okay, how will we recognize each other in that space? And I'm gonna sound like the CIA again. I said, let's do butterfly wings. Let's do let's do butterflies. Mostly because that's just a personal symbol for me. So I said,
Okay.
if you see the word moth or butterfly written down, if you see butterfly wings, that's our indication that we've kind of connected. And one woman who had not even read that message, but she is in the group chat, she came back the next day to report her dream. And she said, holy shit, I saw the word moth written everywhere in my dream last night, but I hadn't read that message that you sent.
Oh,
So that was pretty crazy.
that's wild. Oh my God.
It was very weird. The first night that I did the experiment with everybody, because I'm obviously doing it at the same time, I didn't dream that I was in the mall, but I dreamed that I was at the train station part, which is another part of mall world generally. And I was
Hmm.
directing people, basically. I was standing on this platform and I was like, all right, you're going to go here and this is how you get on the train and this is how you get to the mall. And a couple of people did say they saw me in the dream space, that's not that surprising because, again, we're doing the experiment. I'm the face of the experiment. Of course, that's going to happen. But a bunch of us on that first night had dreams of seeing a bunch of people around a really long trestle table. Like, that was in my dream. And maybe like a dozen other people said, yeah, I had a dream about all these people at this long table. Awesome. So something's happening, you know?
Yeah.
It's not an exact science, but something's happening.
I love it. That's fascinating. I know you probably don't know exactly the answer to this. How many of these people do you think have a history of occult practice?
Yeah, I'm not sure 100%. But I would say, based on just sort of casual conversation with these people in the kind of group chat space, I don't think the majority of them are occultists. Like I
Hmm.
said, there's about 650, 700 people in that chat. Most of them are maybe people with some degree of natural capacity for vivid or lucid dreaming, but most of
Yeah.
them are not, practitioners per se. Maybe they've dabbled
Hmm.
their feet a little bit into some new age stuff, but they're not occultists. So that's also
Hmm.
really interesting, I think.
Yeah, interesting. You've created a slippery slope. We're gonna have a lot more occultists soon.
I know. I'm like, join us. It's time.
Yeah.
Pick up the tools of the oppressor, you guys. let's
Yes.
let's
Amen.
do it.
Well, it's funny because when you were describing this whole experiment, I'm like, oh, this just sounds like tons of things I've been involved with in like witchcraft circles. But
Yeah.
what the witchcraft circles are having you engage with instead of a mall is basically like an egregoric folk tale, you know?
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that you could remove all of the witchiness, but have the same results. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And I think, hot take maybe, but I think that's the case for a lot of things that seem more pop culture or new
Hmm.
agey. I mean, I'm not a chaos magician by any means. I wouldn't put myself under that banner. But I think we can get a little bit too precious about, you know, historicism and this sort of hearkening back to an idealized traditional way of doing things that, let's be honest, sometimes is also not really historically backed or accurate. I mean, I love that window dressing. I love the folkloric stuff. That's sort of my bread and butter. But I find it interesting to play with the more pop culture modern take. And the beautiful thing about Mall World is you have this giant community of people who it's already in their sphere of awareness because they're seeing these videos and they're thinking about it. So you kind of have uh, a fertile field to build on something. You don't have to sort of sell people on, well, let me explain traditional witchcraft to you. Let me explain folklore to
Hmm.
you. Let's talk about fairy. They don't have to
Hmm.
accept all those things because they've already said, oh, yeah, I do have mall dreams. Something weird could be going on there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love it. And you're going to continue doing experiments with this group?
Yeah, so I think what we decided on, because in my experience working dream space stuff, you don't want to, overdo it. We wanted to get into the sweet space where you don't just do one night, because also the night that we chose to do our first launch was the night that Alex Preddy got shot in Minnesota. So
God.
a lot of people were understandably very distressed and traumatized.
Yeah.
And that's gonna mess up your ability to do something frivolous and silly like go to the mall in your dreams.
Yeah.
And so we had decided to do like a couple of different like launches. And then the last time we did it, I said, okay, for those of you who are comfortable, let's do a week of just doing this consistently. So we're going to go through till next Wednesday. And then I'm going to
Cool.
tell everybody, like, let's take a break. I don't think it's good or healthy to do too much of this stuff repetitiously in perpetuity. You need good, healthy sleep. And even if you're not making it to the mall, doing ritual dream work every night, you're not getting restful sleep probably. So
Yeah.
I'm going to tell everybody to take 5 after that. But it's a great group of people, I'll keep the group chat going for sure, and everybody seems very enthusiastic to just see what can happen. So,
That's so cool. I love it. This is a self-serving question, but I know that, like lucid dreaming and dream work is one of the primary things you focus on in certain ways and you offer and teach and stuff. Uh, Something I've just found for myself, and I'm just curious if it correlates with your own experiences or things you hear from people you've worked with. For me to go lucid, there almost always has to be an element of nightmarishness to
hmm,
wake me into lucidity. Otherwise, I won't become lucid. I'm not a natural lucid dreamer easily.
interesting.
And
Huh.
whenever it's happened in conjunction with what I would consider a spirit, like it's been the thing I've asked for, like a part of a ritual, and I go like, come to me in a dream. It is nightmarishness brought on by doppelganger um, situation visuals, and it's happened multiple times.
It's
And And it makes me wake into lucidity because it's so shocking in the dream. It like freaks me out. So I'm just curious if that
Uh,
is the thing you've heard of.
well, so first of all, I was not expecting to go into the doppelganger conversation on this call, so now I'm freaking out. Oh no. So so firstly, I think I think there is something in the nightmarishness or the disconcerting element being something that can trigger lucidity for people. That was definitely the case for me when I was younger. I've been lucid dreaming since I was very, very little. And certainly when I was a small child, that's usually what would trigger it, is that I would be
Hmm.
either in a nightmare or I could almost like feel the nightmare coming. I would sort of, something would be benign, but the dread would start creeping in. And just that sense of dread would trigger lucidity. And then tiny me would be like, oh, we're shutting this shit down. I'm not
Yeah.
doing a nightmare tonight. And then I would wake myself up by
Yeah.
counting backwards from 10. So I think that is not an uncommon experience amongst lucid dreamers. As I've gotten
Yeah.
older, I just will most nights become lucid, and
Wow.
there doesn't always need to be a scary trigger, but I definitely have heard people report that. The doppelganger thing is spinning me out, and I need you to
Yeah.
elaborate on that because
Yeah. Well, I don't have much of a doppelganger thing in my own life or mythopoetics or anything like that, but just
uh-huh.
multiple times when I've done like a ritual where I'm basically asking for like a contact in a dream, the thing that is nightmarish, like it'll be it's part of that like, oh, I'm describing a dream that won't sound scary to you, but it feels scary because I think it's the uncanniness. Because I'll see like a celebrity who isn't scary. And I'll be like, oh, weird. There's Nicole Kidman. And then there's
Mm.
another Nicole Kidman in the same
Hmm.
room. And it freaks me out. And I go like, wait, what's happening? And then a menacing vibe
Interesting.
creeps in. And then I go into lucidity. And when I go into lucidity, I don't stay there. I don't know. I go to like a slightly more vivid place. And then like
Sure.
everything's different. And that's happened
Yeah.
multiple times. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think, and again, this is purely more or less purely experiential, and then the tiny bit of research that I've been able to do into this, because honestly in my experience there aren't that many people writing about this through the lens that I'm trying to bring to the table. But the
Hmm.
doppelganger thing or the double thing, you're
Yeah.
totally right that it is sort of organically and naturally uncanny. I mean, I think Freud literally talks about it in his essay the Unheimlich.
Yeah.
So there is something about that that perhaps is just very buried in the subconscious for us naturally. It's that thing that gives rise to the feeling of the uncanny. But
Hmm.
there is this thread, as I'm sure you know, in the occult, and especially in high strangeness, that
Hmm.
links to the double and to the
Hmm.
doppelganger. It's the witching body, right? It's the fetch.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
the shadow self maybe that pops
Yeah,
up. Um,
yeah.
and so in my own lucid dreaming practice, the double and the doppelganger has been stalking me since around 2019. I think prior to 2019, I had not had that many experiences of it, but it came back in
Mhm,
full force to the point that it became really an overarching synchronicity in my own mythos. And I remember it was really hammering me over the head in 2020 and 2021. And my friend at the time, my best friend, who is kind of a practitioner, but I don't think she would call herself an occultist. But she said to me, she was like, dude, you have to watch Twin Peaks The Return. Like
mm,
everything you're talking about, it that's happening in your
mhm,
dream space is in The Return. And I'm a
hmm,
big David Lynch fan and a big Twin Peaks fan, but I just hadn't made it that far yet. I said, oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I'll get to it. And I only just started watching The Return like a couple
like
weeks ago.
now?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
And
wow,
I was like, "Oh shit."
huh,
Um, so something is there. I don't know what it is. I don't understand the nature of it, but there's something in the dream space, lurking in that liminal witching landscape that is very connected to the double, to the doppelganger, to the fetch, to the changeling.
mhm,
I don't know how to categorize it. but I will tell you
Yeah.
that every time it comes up for me, I'm like, "Huh." Like, what is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. Yeah. I never really connected that. I've only had one experience where in a lucid state, so this is after being propelled to lucidity, I encountered what I either it's what a spirit wanted me to see or it was
Mm,
their actual, you know, visage. And it was weirdly like a very strange version of myself, and almost like an idealized version of myself, which is maybe not what you think of with doppelgangers, which can be
right.
spookier. But it was almost like, oh, this would be me if I was like way more attractive and like, like this is like a younger version of me who had like way more free time to, I don't know, just like have more cool clothes and shit. And it was very weird. And that was like, I don't know, it was a distinctive experience I had, but I never really connected that with the other doppelgangers. That's fascinating. That's weird.
Yeah, I had this crazy dream in 2021. I was actually in I think it was 2021. I was in Kentucky doing a paranormal kind of road trip with my best friend Manna Allen, and we were in Somerset, hanging out with Nathan Isaac and just doing a bunch of weird high strangeness Kentucky stuff. And the last night we were there, I had this lucid dream where I encountered this spirit essentially who was I mean, it's, what dreams are like. He was wearing the skin of the 10th Doctor from Doctor Who, but like he was a
Mhm.
spirit.
Yeah.
And the whole dream was sort of doppelganger coded. There was like somebody else in the dream who was a doppelganger, and there was a lot of double stuff going on. But at the end of the dream, this figure took me aside and said, "I'm a double, and so are you." And
Hmm.
he was like, "You're a double, and that means your blood is made of honey and gold. And you need to remember that it's really important." And I was like,
Whoa.
"Okay." And the
Damn.
other thing was this Doctor Who spirit double said that his name was Doug. And I remember
Oh my
waking up in the
god.
morning and thinking like, "That's weird. Doug, where did that come from?" I told my best friend,
Yeah.
and she said, "You have to watch fucking Twin Peaks: The Return."
Mhm.
So,
Whoa.
yeah, very weird. It's been stalking me for a while. I don't know what it means,
Huh.
but it's
Yeah.
bizarre.
That's so interesting. No, it's cool to hear that. That's fascinating. It's making me reconsider my own experiences. So thank you. I'll have to think about
Yeah.
that for a while.
Right, go meditate on your doppelgangers.
Oh, maybe not. Yeah. Not before bed. Jesus. Yeah. Um, I do want to go into the internet Anne Rice vampire cult. However, I want
Yeah.
to preface that by saying to everybody, first, to get the real, like, long version of this, you should check out Dara's interview with you and Manna Aylin's interview with you because I loved those interviews. It's just such a fun story. It is like worthy of a whole episode. So rather than have you recount it all here,
Yeah, just go
people
there.
should really go listen because they're so good. It's such a, like, I love it. But just a quick synopsis of kind of like the topic, and then I kind of just want to talk about it if we can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I totally agree. Those are great episodes to listen to.
Yeah.
They really gave me both of them. I love them dearly. They gave me the space to really like dive deeply into it through a kind of esoteric lens. And I've talked about
Yeah.
it on podcasts since, and there's a lot of different angles to look at it from. But it's nice to have the space to talk about it through an esoteric lens. So I'm very grateful to Dara and to Mana. So yeah, the synopsis, the in brief, was that I spent about a decade involved in an online Y2K Anne Rice vampire cult, which was based around a website and a message board and a chat room, supposedly run by Anne Rice vampires. It's the pushback I get from most people immediately is like, "Do you not understand role playing?" To which I have to
Mm-hmm.
say, like, "Look at me. Do I look like I've never played Dungeons and Dragons before? Come on, I know what
Mm-hmm.
role playing is." Um, but it was and it wasn't a role play, that it was not obeying the rules of most role play spaces. The people running this group were insisting that they were really the Anne Rice vampires. The mask never dropped, the costumes never came off. And it persisted for me for over a decade. I mean, for them, it persisted to this day. I understand that they still have a forum and they're still doing the same shit 20 years later, which is pretty crazy.
That's wild. Yeah, the story is just so fun, and well, fun's maybe the wrong way to put it. It's
It's kind of
fascinating
fun.
and it's fun. I mean, my initial reaction when I heard it was just like, "Oh, this is such a cool story." It was like one of the few times I would send occult things to people I knew who weren't into the occult, because I'm like, "You just need to hear this story. It'll remind you of the good old internet we used to all have," and just I don't know, it just there's a nostalgia to it, even though it's kind of weird and creepy too, you know?
Yeah.
But then the more I've heard you contextualize it over time and some subsequent interviews and stuff, it's this narrative magic element that comes into play that it just starts to get stranger and stranger. So I'm curious how maybe, you kind of impulsively start talking about this story that's, it's been years in the past. You're kind of telling it almost for fun. Since that's all happened, it's kind of gone viral. You've done all these interviews about it. What are key things that have maybe changed in your own perception of that experience from, like, the day you started talking about it again to now?
Yeah. So last year, was the big year of that because that's when it first got a little pop and it went a little bit viral and I got swept back up in the story really. And coincidentally around that same time I got a hold of Joshua Cutchin's Fourth Wall Phantoms, which
Good. I was
of
gonna
course
ask about
is
that.
a phenomenal book, which I'm still making my way through because it is also long, but
Yes.
remarkable. Joshua's work is incredible. But the the kind of dual instance of getting a hold of this book and then also being dragged back into my own sort of personal mythic narrative that I had left behind at, 15 years or a decade prior was a very surreal experience. And I started realizing, I mean, I don't know. I think there's so many different lenses you can put on the experience that I had. There is the very mundane lens, which is just, okay, it was some older women. I now know that they were, my mom's age. The main cult leader, if you will, is now like 68 years old. And so there is a lens you can put on it where you say, okay, well, it was just bored older women sitting around their house who wanted to pretend to be vampires because that's probably more interesting than being a housewife. Maybe. I don't know. Don't come for me, housewives. Um, but then I think there is a lens you can put on it where you say, what was being conjured? What happens when you have, we can go back to Mole World even. What happens when you have a
Uh-huh.
believing group of 200 or 300 people that are investing for a decade plus all of their time, all of their energy, all of their belief into this concept that vampires are real, that supernatural things are happening, that, people are sneaking into their house at night and giving them vampire blood. It creates a story. And the story it creates is going to, one way or another, ripple out and impact the real world. And it certainly did for me, and for many other people I know. So there's that lens to look at it through. There's the lens of, tulpatic resonance, and the crafting and the creation of tulpas in that space, whether or not you think it was purposeful on the part of people leading this group or not. There's another fringe way of looking at it that I did briefly consider or have on and off briefly considered, which is that the woman who operated this outfit was in the military. And we do have
Full circle.
declassified. Yeah, I mean, not to sound like, gotta get my tinfoil hat, but we do have declassified government documents that have told us that the CIA and other groups were using small online believing communities to road test tech. Do I think, am I 100% sure that that's what was happening in our group? No. But there's this little part of you that has to say, what was at play here? Lestat on the Vampire Forum would constantly call the entire website his grand experiment. What was what was the experiment, Lestat? Tell us. So it was weird last year being dragged back into it. And, I'm writing this book. So I had to really go back into chat logs and journal entries and stuff that I was writing about it in my diary when I was 19 and 20 years old. And it got quite dark, to be honest with you, because it was a traumatizing experience. It was a experience that distorted my perception of reality. And going back into that headspace felt like reviving the narrative in a way, which was
That's
very weird.
that's wild. Yeah, I don't think I've heard you bring up the potential military connection until now, and that is it's very interesting. I remember at some conference, Rin Collier gave a kind of presentation on how he kind of sees things like 4chan and some of these dark web message boards as probably being some sort of kind of manipulation tactic over time and experiment that now we're maybe seeing come to fruition as people are going crazy all over the internet and being
Yeah.
controlled to really sway elections and things like that. So it's very
Yeah, I mean,
weird to
we
consider that.
kind of see evidence of that, without wanting to use buzzwords that might get things flagged, but, things that have dropped recently into the collective consciousness that have proven that
Hmm.
there were powerful figures involved in 4chan and Reddit. You know,
Yeah.
it, to me this stuff is obvious, and you do sound like a conspiracy theorist when you talk about it, so I try not to. But
Yeah.
the internet is also a fertile field. You have a scrying mirror into the houses of millions of people, and all you need to do is drop a little nugget, push the needle a tiny bit, and you start a ball rolling. I mean, you look at QAnon. QAnon is a giant ARG that massively changed reality for millions of people. Arguably, it's changed all of our realities because it, had such an impact on American politics and global politics. So, belief is a powerful engine, and you don't have to be an occultist to participate in that or to be impacted by that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We started the conversation with Mall World. Now we're talking about this experience you had quite a while ago. And it seems like the only difference in the two is agency. Um, it's one is you seeking something and feeling empowered to experience something that feels non-mundane or what have you, magical. And the other is it being done to you. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really the key. Um, and I was thinking about this last night. I'm writing a piece at the moment that I'm hoping will come out soon about the whole thing.
Mm,
And narrative magic, when you are not empowered in that narrative, when you are not really writing it, you're just in it and you're being moved around like a chess piece. That's where things become dangerous. And that was the case with the cult from day one. They were the figures who got to be the vampires, the people with the power. They were calling the shots, they were writing the story. And we got to be in the story, but we didn't really get the agency to move the needle or create the plot. We were just in there being moved around like little chess pieces. So that's
yeah.
definitely the difference, I think. Because I mean, you're right. In some ways, it's still participation in an imaginal space. It's still the cultivation with a group of people of some sort of, you know, liminal space of high strangeness where you suspend disbelief and where you step into ritual space or you step into witching space. Um, in that way, it is similar, but it really is that sense of, are you in charge of your story or are you letting other people take charge of your story?
Yeah, that's really well said. That's fascinating. Now that you are a person who, from what I can tell, has relationships with spirits and this sort of thing, are there any like entities that you work with and communicate with now that you think you were interacting with during that experience?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
That was a that was a crazy arc. So
Huh.
basically, 100%. I had had experiences with sort of one particular spirit dating right back to when I was quite small. And as spirits do, it changed forms a little bit over time. But I now recognize it as probably the same entity. And while I was in the vampire cult, I was still having these paranormal experiences and, you know, experiencing spirit contact in dreams, but also seeing things in waking life or in hypnagogic space and stuff like that. And it was reflecting what I was absorbed and obsessed with, which was vampire stuff.
Yeah.
And the cult were taking my experiences and building them into the narrative. So it became very
Okay.
enmeshed in and braided with that. And so when I left the cult, which was roughly in about 2012, I had a period of time where I had to just put all of that in a box and not look at it. I didn't even really practice magic for a good couple of years because I just was so burned by all of it that it was easier to shut it away and say, none of it's real. All of this is bullshit, rather than try and unpack and untangle.
Hmm.
So that went on for a while, and I slowly came back into my witchcraft practice, after about 2015, but was still not looking at the personal side of it, I guess, the spirit side of it. And then around 2019, 2020, I started re-engaging with the concept of, okay, let me do things for me. Let me have more of a personal journey with this. And I got a reading from somebody who at the time I didn't know well at all. We had never really had a friendly conversation. And it was a natal chart reading. Actually, it was just an astrological reading. And so it was, pretty normal, just talking about here's here's what your life looks like, here's your strengths, here's your challenges. And then at the end of the session, she paused and she said, "I'm so sorry. I need to tell you something, but you're gonna think I'm insane." And I can't explain it to you. The pit of my stomach dropped out because I just knew what she was gonna say somehow. And she said, "I don't do this all the time, but I can scry and I can scry the natal chart, and there is a spirit with you, and I feel like I need to tell you about it, but, please don't think I'm nuts." And I said, Tell me what's going on." And she accurately physically described this thing that I had been seeing for decades. And the weirdest part was toward the end of her explanation, she said it feels fairy, but it kind of feels like a vampire. And at that point I was just like, okay. So that popped the lid off everything. And then I had to go back and I had to look at all my past experiences. I had to dive into it. I had to build relationship with this entity again because, I had just been blocking it out for so long. I mean, the last dream I had had about it prior to that was literally we had been standing on a cliff, me and this being, and he had tried to hand me a key, and I was so pissed off that I just like yeeted the key into a ravine, and I was like, "No, fuck you. I don't want whatever this is. Go away." So rebuilding that bridge has been a really interesting experience.
Oh, that's
It was a lot. It
fascinating.
was it was a lot. It was very emotional and very
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, that is something that I definitely wanted to talk to you about. It's something that I've heard you casually touch on a relationship to fairy in other interviews and stuff. I don't know if you've written about it much. Maybe I've missed that. Um, but yeah, I mean that's kind of laying the groundwork. But what is your relationship to what you've called like the fairy faith in your practice, or maybe how has that evolved for you?
Yeah, I think for me, full disclosure and caveat at the beginning that I don't have, an initiation into a fairy-based tradition, nothing like that. But opening that box in 2020 and looking at stuff again through that lens, started to put a lot of puzzle pieces together for me that I had been missing for years and years. Because for me, anyway, fairy faith is very tied to ancestry and ancestral practice. Of course, it doesn't have to be for everybody, but that's how it is for me. And, I was born in England. I was born in the rural UK. I grew up in the Cotswolds. So the first decade of my life was on that land, really steeped in folklore and steeped in this kind of dual wield folkloric practice, but also Christianity, which is sort of my understanding of fairy faith, is that it does sort of dual wield those things. There's this sort of intersection between the folklore and between the syncretic and absorbed, Catholic practice. And that's kind of how I grew up. The village that I lived in, the church, there are all these, tiny medieval villages. The church is still the center of the town. Everybody goes because that's just what you do. If you don't go to church, culturally, you're gonna get some side eye. But something about growing up that way, growing up on the land there, having from a very young age a very strong connection to the land. I was very drawn to nature. I was very drawn to being outside. I mean, also, again, it was the 90s, so that's just was more common to run around outside back then, especially if you lived rural. That was in my bones and it was in my blood. Um, and I detached from it a little bit when I moved to Australia as a 10-year-old. I moved to the suburbs. It's obviously a very, very different biome. It's a super different experience going from living in a tiny village population like 1,000 people to living in a city. And so I got sort of divorced from it, but then also that nostalgia came into play. And so I sort of I remained connected to the folklore of the British Isles, to the fairy tales that I grew up with, but I didn't understand them through the lens of magical practice. It took many, many, many years for me to kind of rediscover that thread. I mean, arguably, if I'm being perfectly transparent, I only started to rediscover that thread in about 2019. Because
Mhm.
prior to that, I was like, fairy magic. You see all the books on Barnes and Noble. It's some like pink book with a Tinkerbell on the
Uh-huh.
front. You're like, what the fuck is this? So I wasn't taking it all that seriously. And then I started re-engaging with it in 2020. I met a bunch of people who were practicing, folkloric witchcraft, traditional witchcraft, engaging with the current that way. I started reading a bunch of Andrew Chumley, not to say that Andrew Chumley is fairy faith by any means, but there's definitely a little bit of overlap and intersection sometimes with some of the stuff that Chumley brings up. And it just started to make a lot of sense to me. So when I say that, you know, I don't publicly always refer to my practice as fairy faith. There is overlap there for me, but I think my own personal practice is a little bit of a hodgepodge, honestly. Largely probably because I've just grown up in so many different places and my path has taken me through all these sort of weird channels. But the fairy element is definitely there. And it's in how I relate to the other in terms of, the big other. It's in how I relate to myself. And I think it's a very powerful and very resonant practice for some of us. It's not for everybody. But I've benefited very much from that. And it helped me dive back into visionary dreaming and trance meditation. It helped me reconnect to the land where I now live, the land here in New Orleans, vs where I was originally from. And that's fairy to me. I resist the idea that they are just like land spirits. I think there's something else and something bigger going on there. But there is nevertheless a connection to the land. And I think that's what I come back to as the most foundational and visceral part of my practice. Is it's internal and it's visionary and it's dreamy, but it's also very connected to the land.
I love it. That's a beautiful answer.
It
I
was
have
long,
more
I'm sorry.
questions. No, that
It
was
was a
great.
ramble.
That was beautiful. I have more questions about fairy for you,
Mm,
but we're gonna do that in a Patreon segment. And
okay.
for now, if you wanna just give some plugs to the audience, all the things they should check out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me. I have a website. It's celestemott.com, and that's got all the links and so on. I'm on Instagram as Celeste Mott, Mott, and from there you can kind of find all my other social platforms. I'm trying to really big up the Substack right now because part of what I'm trying to do, is get people to kind of look at my writing more and not just tiny short form videos. So Substack, I'm also just celestemott.substack.com. And I do have a Patreon if you want to join our Discord and do weird, fun psychic dream experiments and talk about whatever's on your mind.
Yeah, the, Substack is something that I dove into just in the past, like, couple months and really loving everything on there, so y people should definitely check that out. Um, yeah, and now we're in a Patreon episode. Welcome to the green room. Um, yeah, I love that description of fairy, and I have a few questions really, but one that jumps out to me is how much do you relate your attraction to the Anne Rice vampire milieu with your relationship, maybe that you weren't even aware of, to what you now understand as fairy? Or do you see it simply as this entity and or a collection of entities where like, well, this is what we're doing. She's into Anne
Mm,
Rice. Let's do this now.
hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, or is
Yeah.
it like there was something actually that pinged about Anne Rice because of it, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a great question.